YouTube analytics show that only around 8% of the people who watch my videos are subscribed to my channel. If you can, click the subscribe button and also leave a like. I really appreciate it, but with that being said, let's get straight into this video on Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Pokémon Shining Pearl. Hope you enjoy. As it's Pokémon Scarlet and Violet release week, I thought I'd do a few videos on every Pokémon game that's come out in the last few years, just to do a little bit of analysis to see where the Pokémon series is at the moment and what Scarlet and Violet need to do to improve it. This is my video on the Generation 4 remakes that were released last year, Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Pokémon Shining Pearl. Hope you enjoy. So I think that it's safe to say that these remakes were very safe bets in the eyes of Game Freak. They didn't depart from the original game almost at all, and they didn't even change the art style. That's actually my first problem with the game, the art style. So with any Pokemon remakes that have happened before this, the games have been remade in the art style of the game's current generation. So for example, go back to Generation 6 and you have the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which is the remakes of the original Ruby and Sapphire games. Those were released in the same art style that Generation 6 was. And if you go back to Generation 4, you've got Heart Gold and Soul Silver, remakes of original Gold and Silver, that were done in the same style as the games of the time, which were, well, the games I'm talking about today, which is Diamond and Pearl. I think that the issue that Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl have got is that they're under a lot more critique than those games were. Those games were released on handheld systems, so they didn't really have the same need to be graphical powerhouses. Well, not powerhouses, but you know what I mean. They needed to be good looking games. The issue with Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl is that in my eyes anyway, it would have been so interesting to see what these games look like from a Sword and Shield perspective. And I know Sword and Shield have come under a lot of fire, from me as well, about how they looked. I think it could have been really interesting to see how Sinnoh could have looked rendered in that sort of detail. Seeing Sinnoh again like this, it doesn't feel like a remake. It feels like a remaster. And that's actually my main problem with the game. I think it was actually really disingenuous for Game Freak to position these games as a remake. I understand that they were technically remade from the ground up, but a remake has to show, in my eyes anyway, real improvement from the last games. These are graphical remasters, as they don't actually show any meaningful differentiations at all. There's no new mechanics, there's no new post-game, which I'll talk about later by the way, because that's another one of the things that really annoyed me about this game. It just feels like a big waste of potential. These games could have been so good, and they could have been so interesting. A new Sinnoh rendered at a new scale, at a completely different angle, so that you could get a completely new perspective on the games that released all the way back in 2009. What's happened is that they're still good, obviously, because the original games were good. But now, years later, they're just not quite as special. For example, if you want to see a game that did hit the same mark, and that was presented in technically the same style, you had the Legend of Zelda game that came out just, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago? Link's Awakening? That game was rendered in the same art style, but it looked so much better. It looked like it had been rendered with so much care. It was like a little toy box adventure, it was adorable. I didn't play Link's Adventure, because, I've got to be honest, 2D Zelda games aren't really my thing. I was much more of a Breath of the Wild fan. But the point still stands. That game looked like it was crafted the way it was. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl just looked like they landed the way they were because Game Freak wanted to pump money out, and they wanted to just siphon money in from fans who desperately wanted a nostalgia trip. And it really grates on me, because I love these games. These are still my favourite generation of games. But it's just so disappointing to me that this is the level of remake that we got. And we could have had something like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which had a massive post-game, new features, a completely new perspective, they had a lot more to offer than what Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl do. And that actually moves me on to my next point about why this game is so disappointing to me, and that's the post-game. Side note, when watching this back, I think I've been a little bit harsh on the gameplay side of this game. I'd completely forgotten about the Grand Underground, I've got to be honest, and it's weird because that was actually my favourite part of the game when it came out. I spent loads of time there. It's basically a massive underground system where you can catch Pokémon, sort of similar to how the Great Underground was in the first game, but vastly expanded, and it's also way more fun. It's so much fun to hunt fossils, and I'd completely forgotten about this whole part of the game, so I do apologise. There's also the sticker system that you can use to customise your Pokeballs, but apart from that, I wasn't lying about the fact that there isn't very much that's been added. I just forgot about those, and I thought it'd be unfair if I didn't mention them. Anyway, on with the rest of the video. The opportunities for a real post-game in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were absolutely enormous. Generation 4 is known to have one of the most lore-rich Pokémon mythologies of any Pokémon game coming before it, apart from maybe Generation 3. So why on earth, having released a remake, was there no, even as DLC I would have taken it, there was just no post-game whatsoever, apart from what was already there? Like, look at Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, like the Delta chapter, there was a whole new level of immersion and story that you really get you into the world and get you experiencing the game like never before. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have nothing apart from what the original games offered them. There's no post-game, there's no explanation for why there's no post-game either, it's clearly just laziness. And it's actually frustrating, like it's so frustrating to me as well as a massive fan of the originals, because do you know what I would have loved? I'd have loved to see proper story versions of the Darkrai saga and Arceus, and even like Shaman or the Roman legendaries. Like I would have loved to see just a little bit more expansion on why they exist, their backstory. I know we've had that in the anime, but I really wanted it in the games. Like imagine playing through a story where you went all the way to New Moon Island, it was a whole story about Darkrai and it was interesting and dark and, you know, introduced new characters, and like it doesn't take a genius to really think of a good story that could have gone on with. Like it just feels like a no-brainer. If you've got a remake of a game that's beloved to fans already, why not add to it and give them something back? Like this game, I'm sorry, but it was sold for full price. Like full price. £50 for a game that had no improvements, or well, apart from the graphics, but no mechanical improvements anyway, from a game that was released 13 years ago. How can you justify that? I just find it so incredible that Game Freak thought it was a good idea to release these. And I gotta be honest, I just think it's such a letdown. And I know I'm over-hating and being over-dramatic on these games, but for me personally, as a massive fan of the originals, I was so excited for these, and I played them on release week, and I finished them, and I just felt just empty really, because I was expecting so much more, and I got almost nothing. But, you know, it is what it is. Let's talk a little bit about what they could have been, and why the potential is so wasted on what was actually released. If I'd been the game designers behind these games, I think I would have built them, maybe not in the game style of something like Sword and Shield, but I think I would have done it in something slightly closer to how Gen 7 was, but obviously scaled up a lot for the Switch. I think I would have done something bridging the gap between those two. Something not too realistic so it taxes the Switch, but not something so simplistic that it turns into what we got with Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, which was exactly the same as something we'd had 12 years ago, or 13 years ago. I just think that there could have been so much more added to this game to make it truly special and worth the full price that we paid for it. For example, post-game. I would have put in a story, a multi-episodic story actually, maybe even as DLC. If they wanted to make a bit more money out of us, I would have been more than willing to pay for a bit of DLC that would have had the full story content. It would have been a bit scummy, but it would have been better than what we got. I would have done a full story involving the ability to capture Pokemon like Arceus, Darkrai, Shaymin, Deoxys. I know it's a Gen 3 Pokemon originally, but there is also an opportunity to catch Deoxys in this game. I would have done a Spiritomb story as well, Shaymin. You know, you've got there's 6 episodes there of different Pokemon you can capture, and if you include the roamings, there's even more. So I would have done that. I think I would have done maybe something with the Battle Arena and the Battle Tower as well, just to make it a bit more modern than what it actually is, and even something more arena style as well. Just, you know, something a little bit more interesting. These games, they just feel flat and plastic. That's what I'd say actually. If I had to describe these games as something, I'd say they're plastic. Shiny and cool to look at until you get into the surface, where you realise there's not very much there. And that's the problem. They're perfectly functional, but they just don't feel like they're enough. And that's my problem. I do want to love these games, because I love the originals, but I just can't, because they feel like they could have been so much more than what we got. And that's why I think that Pokemon games in future do need to learn from what this one was. Because if we get a remake of, say, Gen 5 in the future, I think it needs to adhere to what we had before with remakes, whereas it follows the design of the current gen of Pokemon, and not one trying to create its own style of remake in where it's a one-to-one recreation. Because if there's anything I wouldn't want to see, it's a one-to-one creation of Gen 5, because that has some really good opportunities to do some good storytelling, because that has some lore that's even more interesting, I think, than Gen 4. But anyway, that's what I think. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and to leave whatever thoughts you had down in the comments below, and let me know what you thought about the remakes. Do you think they were good, or do you think what I thought, and that they were a little bit inadequate? Whatever happens, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, and have a good one.